Before we begin, take a deep breath. Let the noise of the day fade away. You're about to drift through the quiet corners of Victorian history, where desire wore lace and silence spoke volumes. If you enjoy these calm journeys through the past, subscribe to help us keep telling them. Let's start. You live in an age of corsets and closed curtains. It is 1883, and London smells of coal, soap, and moral restraint. You are expected to walk quietly, to speak gently, and to never mention what stirs inside the body. Desire in this era is not an emotion but an illness. The Victorians call it nervous agitation, female disorder, or most commonly, hysteria. Doctors, many trained in the new sciences of nerves and anatomy, believe that the female body is fragile, unstable, and ruled by the womb. They write about wandering uteruses, a concept that sounds absurd today but once filled pages of medical journals. A woman who laughs too much, cries too long, or grows restless without reason might be diagnosed with hysteria. The cause, they say, lies deep within her reproductive organs. The cure must therefore be physical. In small consulting rooms, lit by weak daylight and gas lamps, doctors begin what they call pelvic massages. These are medical procedures meant to relieve women of their nervous tension. The doctors, many uncomfortable with the idea of direct sexual contact, describe their work as therapeutic rather than intimate. Yet the outcome is unmistakably sexual. They induce what they term hysterical paroxysm. Modern readers know the word for it: orgasm. This treatment is prescribed widely. Women from wealthy homes visit their doctors weekly, sometimes daily, to be soothed. The records reveal that many reported relief, temporary calm, better sleep, improved mood. The doctors, however, complain of exhaustion. They write in journals about how difficult it is to perform these procedures manually. The cure, they say, is physically taxing for the physician. By the 1880s, inventors step in. One physician, Dr. Joseph Mortimer Granville, designs a mechanical device to assist with the treatment. It is called the Granville hammer, and it vibrates rapidly. Granville insists it is for muscle therapy, but his peers quickly find another use. The vibrator becomes a medical tool sold to doctors across Europe and America. Advertisements in medical catalogs describe it as a labor-saving device for hysteria. What makes this story peculiar is not the act itself, but the denial around it. Victorian society prided itself on purity, yet the medical establishment was commercializing pleasure under the banner of science. Women could not speak of desire openly, but they could book appointments to treat hysteria. The contradiction defined the age. In the waiting rooms, women in long skirts and gloves sit quietly, each clutching a small card from her doctor. The diagnosis written on it reads neuralgic fatigue, uterine irritation, or hysteric tendencies. None of these words reveal the truth. Behind the lace curtains of respectability, a secret industry of medical pleasure thrives. Historians now debate how widespread this practice truly was. Some say it was limited to a few progressive physicians. Others believe it was nearly universal. What is certain is that hysteria became one of the most commonly diagnosed conditions among middle and upper-class women of the time. It was convenient for everyone. The women received attention, the doctors earned income, and the culture remained publicly moral. The idea that the female body was uncontrollable, that it needed to be managed by men, was deeply embedded in Victorian thought. Even the language reinforced it. The word hysteria comes from the Greek hystera, meaning womb. In this framework, female emotion was not a matter of psychology but of reproductive anatomy. A man's mind was rational, a woman's was uterine. There were dissenters. Some female doctors, such as Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, began to question the practice. Anderson, one of Britain's first women to earn a medical degree, warned that hysteria was a convenient label for ignorance. She argued that women's ailments were often caused by boredom, isolation, and lack of education, not a malfunctioning womb. Her voice was rare but prophetic. The link between mental health and social conditions would not be widely accepted for decades. Meanwhile, technology advanced. By 1902, the first electric vibrators entered the market. They were marketed directly to households. Newspapers ran ads for personal massagers that promised to restore youth and vitality. Housewives could now treat their nerves at home. The devices were sold in the same catalogs as sewing machines and toasters. This commercialization of pleasure disguised as therapy revealed the paradox at the heart of Victorian morality. Publicly, the age was one of restraint. Privately, it was obsessed with control, including the control of pleasure. Every moral rule had a loophole, every restriction a hidden release. You can imagine a small London clinic on a gray winter morning. The doctor adjusts his spectacles, dips his hands in warm oil, and begins the prescribed treatment. The woman on the table stares at the ceiling, her face calm, her mind somewhere between shame and relief. When the procedure ends, the doctor records, "Symptoms improved. Return next week." Outside, the fog wraps around the gas lamps. The city hums with carriages and footsteps. No one speaks of what happens behind the doors of such rooms. Respectability depends on silence. The story of Victorian hysteria is both absurd and revealing. It shows how a society can pathologize desire while secretly profiting from it. It also shows how technology, even in its earliest form, was intertwined with intimacy. The vibrator was not born in the bedroom but in the clinic. It was a tool of medicine before it became an object of pleasure. You might wonder how many women understood what was really happening, and how many simply accepted their doctor's explanation. Did they believe they were being healed? Or did they quietly know the truth and prefer not to say it aloud? As the 19th century faded into the 20th, the moral codes began to loosen. Psychology replaced hysteria. Freud introduced the idea that repression itself could cause illness. What the Victorians had called nerves or hysteria, Freud described as unconscious desire. The vocabulary changed, but the struggle between control and freedom remained. The question lingers like the London fog. Were the Victorians truly repressed, or were they simply better at hiding their pleasure behind the language of medicine? You sit in a parlor on a quiet afternoon. The clock ticks. The curtains filter the London light into a soft haze. Every object around you speaks of restraint. The porcelain teacups, the heavy drapes, the books arranged neatly by moral order. Yet the stillness hides a hum of suppressed energy. The Victorians built their lives upon appearances, and nowhere was this more visible than in the drawing room. The drawing room was the stage of the respectable home. Visitors came here, and manners ruled every gesture. You could sit but not slouch. You could speak but only of approved topics, whether church, literature, or charity. Yet under the surface, conversation often turned to coded meanings. A raised eyebrow, a half-sentence, or a glance could carry entire messages. Courtship lived here, but it wore a disguise. Politeness became a language of desire. If a man brushed a woman's hand while offering tea, the act might linger in her mind for days. A dropped glove was not always an accident. The Victorians had no shortage of rules about touch, but they also learned how to bend them. This culture of control created its own form of eroticism. The forbidden became powerful precisely because it was forbidden. You could not speak of sex, so you spoke of poetry. You could not touch skin, so you admired lace. A single exposed ankle might hold the weight of a confession. A glimpse of wrist beneath a glove could quicken a heartbeat. Writers and artists knew this unspoken truth. The novels of the time, those by Hardy, Eliot, and the Brontes, often circled around desire without naming it. The readers understood the hints. They read between the lines, just as they did between words in conversation. To live in Victorian England was to become fluent in silence. At the same time, the divide between public morality and private behavior widened. Brothels flourished across London. The city's underworld offered what its polite society denied. Yet even in sin, Victorians demanded decorum. The most famous establishments operated with rules, menus, and class distinctions. Respectable men who preached virtue by day often visited such places by night, their identities masked by candlelight. The double life was the defining feature of the age. Publicly, men quoted scripture. Privately, they paid for pleasure. Women, bound by reputation, had fewer escapes. Still, some found them. Courtesans became celebrities. They attended operas, influenced fashion, and collected gifts from princes and politicians. The newspapers hinted at their names but rarely printed them. The public pretended not to know, though everyone did. One such woman was Cora Pearl. Born Eliza Emma Crouch in England, she reinvented herself in France. Cora became one of the most famous courtesans of the Second Empire. Her dinner parties were legendary. She served champagne in bathtubs and once appeared at a ball dusted entirely in silver powder. Victorian men called her immoral, but they could not look away. She lived freely without apology. Her very existence mocked the pretenses of restraint. Back in England, the medical establishment continued its quiet trade in hysteria treatments. Yet as word spread, the tone began to shift. Some doctors started writing cautious papers questioning the legitimacy of the pelvic massage. They feared it might invite ridicule. Others doubled down, publishing testimonials about miraculous recoveries. The contradictions piled up. Everyone seemed to know what was happening, but no one dared to say it plainly. Meanwhile, the home itself became a battleground of morals. Women were told that their virtue was the foundation of civilization. Manuals instructed wives to serve without complaint and to suppress all unfeminine impulses. The very word pleasure was omitted from most marriage guides. Sexual education did not exist. Ignorance was called innocence. But nature has no respect for etiquette. Behind closed doors, couples improvised their own understandings. Many Victorian letters between husbands and wives, when unfiltered by historians, revealed deep affection and curiosity. Some were even playful, coded in language that blurred tenderness and restraint. These letters rarely survived publication. Families burned them after death, fearful of scandal. What remains is enough to prove that desire persisted despite the silence. The commercialization of respectability reached absurd levels. The corset industry, for instance, sold more than garments. It sold discipline. A tight waist symbolized virtue, control, and femininity. Women were told that beauty required suffering. Yet many corset advertisements also hinted at another message: that men admired such discipline, that the restraint itself was alluring. The product both constrained and enticed. The contradiction was the point. In the same era, the growing field of photography found itself entangled with desire. The camera was new, scientific, respectable. Yet photographers began offering private sittings. These portraits, often soft-focused and carefully posed, captured women in states of undress or intimacy. They were called artistic studies. The buyers were collectors, artists, and sometimes doctors. Officially, these images were exercises in anatomy and light. Unofficially, they were pornography in disguise. Even Queen Victoria's court was not immune to double standards. The Queen herself was devoted to her husband, Prince Albert, and mourned him deeply after his death. Yet her private journals reveal warmth and passion often denied by her public image. She once wrote, "Albert's embraces are the greatest comfort." In the context of her time, such a sentence bordered on scandalous honesty. The contradiction between moral restraint and private indulgence was not accidental. It served a purpose. The empire's power depended on order. The home became the model of that order, each role fixed. Man as authority, woman as virtue. If the moral structure broke, the illusion of stability might crumble. So repression became patriotic. Decency was sold as duty. At the same time, the working classes and colonies were often portrayed as morally inferior, their supposed lack of restraint used as justification for control. British newspapers described primitive cultures as indulgent and unclean, defining purity in contrast. The Victorians built their self-image on a lie of restraint, and the world paid the price. In this way, hysteria was not only a medical condition but a mirror of society. It reflected the discomfort of an empire that wished to command everything, even the human body. The diagnosis told women that their pain was personal, not political, kept them quiet. It made rebellion sound like illness, but the quiet was never complete. The late 19th century saw the rise of women who questioned this structure openly. Writers like Sarah Grand and Mona Caird published essays demanding equality within marriage. They described the new woman, educated, independent, and unafraid of her own body. These women frightened the old order. Newspapers mocked them, calling them hysterical. The word still carried power. As electricity spread through cities, it changed more than light. It transformed intimacy. The electric vibrator, now small and portable, began to appear in advertisements that blurred the line between health and pleasure. Women could own one without shame, though they all knew the truth. Electricity, symbol of modern progress, became the quiet accomplice of private liberation. You wake in a house of lace and whispers. The streets outside are quiet, except for the rattle of a horse cart and the sound of boots on cobblestone. It is 1897, the high noon of the Victorian age, and respectability still rules. The world believes it knows what is proper. But beneath every carpet and curtain, small revolutions stir. The Victorians have perfected denial, yet denial cannot last forever. The medical profession, once confident in its authority, begins to show cracks. Young doctors read Freud and Charcot. They attend lectures about hysteria, now reframed as something mental rather than physical. They argue about the meaning of dreams and repression. Some laugh at the idea of uterine massage. Others secretly keep their devices, unwilling to abandon a profitable business. The polite word therapy continues to protect what everyone understands but never says aloud. Meanwhile, women begin to read differently. They discover novels not meant for them, French books like Madame Bovary and Therese Raquin, and they do not faint. They recognize themselves. Publishers pretend shock, yet copies sell out. Libraries ban such titles, which guarantees their popularity. The forbidden becomes the fashionable. The more society denies desire, the more it grows in secret. In London, whispers of the new woman grow louder. She rides a bicycle, studies medicine, writes essays, and sometimes refuses marriage. Men's magazines mock her. Cartoons show her chasing terrified husbands. But she represents a slow, invisible shift, the beginning of ownership over her own body. Each pamphlet, each whispered conversation about anatomy or rights, chips at the wall of repression. The vibrator, still officially medical, slips further into private life. By 1905, companies market it as a home appliance. The advertisements use the same tone as those for sewing machines or coffee grinders. The message is clear without saying anything. This is modern, safe, clean. Electricity hides what candles once revealed. For the first time, women can seek pleasure without a man and without breaking the law. In this quiet way, the revolution begins not in parliament but in bedrooms. Yet the contradictions persist. Publicly, morality tightens. Laws against obscenity grow harsher. The Obscene Publications Act of 1857 still haunts publishers and artists. Books are seized, paintings censored, plays banned. The government believes it is protecting virtue. What it really protects is illusion. The more rules imposed, the more people learn to speak in code. Writers adapt. The erotic becomes intellectual. Henry James, Thomas Hardy, and George Meredith all find ways to write about longing without ever describing it. Each sentence becomes a mask, each metaphor a confession in disguise. Readers learn to decode. The Victorians turn repression into art. Even photography evolves. What began as artistic studies becomes a thriving underground market. Paris leads the trade. British collectors buy French photographs by the thousands. Customs officers try to intercept them, but desire travels faster than paperwork. The images cross the channel in hidden boxes labeled scientific instruments. The camera, once the tool of documentation, becomes the eye of secrecy. At home, women still live under strict expectations. Marriage defines their worth. Divorce remains a scandal. Yet, inside those marriages, the private realities vary. Some couples discover affection and mutual curiosity. Others live as strangers. The line between love and duty blurs. The language of medicine offers explanations for unhappiness. Fatigue, melancholy, nerves, but not freedom. Doctors prescribe tonics, not change. Still, the very existence of medical pleasure plants a seed of doubt. If doctors can touch women under the name of science, then perhaps the act itself is not sinful. The logic begins to unravel. The idea that desire is natural, even healthy, slowly re-enters polite discussion. Journals like The Lancet start publishing cautious papers about female sexuality and mental health. The tone remains clinical, but the silence breaks. In 1899, British author Sarah Grand writes about the new aspect of the woman question. She describes how ignorance and repression cause suffering. She urges education and equality. Her essay circulates among women's clubs and universities. Men dismiss her as hysterical. The irony escapes them. By the early 1900s, dozens of female doctors, writers, and activists join her cause. Hysteria itself begins to vanish from textbooks. The diagnosis that once excused male control quietly dies. The homes of the era reflect this shift. The architecture of secrecy softens. The parlor loses its moral weight. Curtains open. Windows widen. Furniture grows lighter. The heavy velvet that once symbolized virtue gives way to openness. It is as if the houses themselves exhale after decades of holding their breath. Even fashion changes. Corsets loosen. Designers like Paul Poret remove them entirely. He calls his dresses liberating. Critics call them scandalous. Yet women buy them anyway. For the first time, clothing moves with the body rather than against it. The shape of society begins to follow. By 1910, electricity lights the city. Telegraphs, telephones, and trams connect people faster than ever before. The pace of life quickens. The strict rhythms of Victorian time, tea at 4, church on Sunday, no longer hold absolute power. The empire that once seemed eternal starts to look tired. The colonies push back. Industry replaces manners as the mark of progress. The moral code that ruled the drawing rooms begins to crack under the weight of the modern age. Still, nostalgia clings. The newspapers mourn the loss of virtue. Clergymen preach about moral decay. They warn that women are abandoning their duty. But the sermons no longer inspire fear. The younger generation listens politely, then returns to a world already changed. Somewhere, in a small town, an old doctor cleans his medical instruments. The vibrator on his desk hums faintly, its purpose now openly understood. He remembers a time when such things were spoken of only in whispers. He wonders whether he was a healer or a hypocrite. The thought lingers as he blows out the lamp. The story of Victorian desire is not about scandal. It is about transformation. What began as denial became discovery. By medicalizing pleasure, society accidentally normalized it. By forbidding conversation, it forced creativity. By hiding the body, it made people see it more clearly. Every curtain drawn to protect morality eventually revealed the truth it tried to conceal. You imagine standing in a Victorian bedroom now, long after its occupants are gone. The wallpaper fades, the mirror gathers dust, but the air still carries the faint scent of perfume and electricity. The objects remain, the corset, the comb, the folded letter. They are small witnesses to a great contradiction, a world that feared desire but could not live without it. Today, historians study the Victorians with fascination. They see them not as prudish caricatures, but as complex people caught between progress and fear. Their inventions, their codes, their hypocrisies, all shaped the modern world's understanding of intimacy. The vibrator, once a medical tool, became a symbol of independence. The very object meant to suppress conversation about desire ended up liberating it. You may find it amusing or sad, or quietly profound. The Victorians built walls around pleasure, only to discover that pleasure does not obey architecture. Love letters in code. You sit at a desk by candlelight. The room is quiet except for the scratch of a pen. It is 1862. The ink glistens as you write, careful and deliberate. Every word you choose must pass inspection if intercepted by servants, parents, or the postmaster. You are in love, but you live in a time when love is not private. Victorian England worships propriety. Every letter could be a moral test. The post is sacred, yet it is never truly secret. Maids sort the envelopes. Clerks read the addresses. Even families open each other's mail for convenience. Lovers must learn to hide their affection in plain sight, so they write in code. This code is not one of numbers or symbols, but of manners, metaphors, and small turns of phrase. The weather has been warm lately might mean, I long for your touch. I hope your garden thrives. Could mean, I miss you deeply. These substitutions create a parallel language understood only by two people and perhaps no one else. The system evolved naturally. Letters were the heart of Victorian romance. Courtship often happened entirely through correspondence. A man might court a woman for years without touching her hand. Letters built the bridge. They also built the walls. Every love letter had to walk the fine line between feeling and decency. Too direct and it risked scandal. Too distant and it lost meaning. The Victorians mastered the art of suggestion. They could write 3 pages about longing without mentioning the body once. The restraint itself became part of the emotion. One famous example survives between Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Robert Browning. Their correspondence, spanning nearly 600 letters, reveals deep affection masked in formal language. Elizabeth, often ill and confined, writes with tenderness yet maintains propriety. She signs her early letters yours sincerely, and only after many months dares to use yours ever. The shift, small to modern eyes, was monumental in her time. Each phrase carried weight. Ever yours implied permanence, devotion, even possession. To write it was to confess without confessing. Readers of their letters today see love in the margins. The pauses, the corrections, the small hesitations that mean more than any bold declaration could. Beyond famous poets, ordinary people followed the same delicate ritual. Stationery shops sold special courtship paper, often decorated with flowers, doves, or soft pastel borders. The designs helped disguise the content. A strict mother might see nothing more than polite correspondence, even as passion pulsed between the lines. Ink itself became intimate. Lovers sometimes mixed a drop of perfume or hair strands into letters. Some wrote with disappearing ink that revealed words only when warmed near a candle. Others created tiny ciphers. A pressed flower might mark a phrase. A fold at the corner might mean, I love you. One crease meant yes, 2 meant no. It was a secret world built on ordinary materials. The postal service fueled this quiet revolution. The penny post, introduced in 1840, made letter writing affordable for everyone. Suddenly, the middle and working classes could exchange words across distance. For a penny, emotion could travel miles. Mailboxes multiplied, and with them, temptation. In 1851, Britain processed over 300 million letters. Every envelope carried a potential secret, but secrecy came with risk. Lost letters could destroy reputations. One misplaced envelope could expose a hidden affair. Newspapers occasionally printed moral scandals about intercepted love notes. Names were sometimes omitted, but the message was clear. Privacy was fragile. Because of this, the art of coded writing became almost a science. Manuals appeared teaching the language of flowers, where each bloom carried a meaning. A rose meant love, but its color changed its tone. Red for passion, white for purity, yellow for jealousy. Forget-me-nots meant devotion. To send a bouquet was to send a message few could decode. This floral code extended into literature and letters. When a man wrote, I saw daisies today, the recipient might blush. The public saw innocence. The beloved saw confession. Censorship extended even to handwriting. Women were warned not to use flourished signatures, as loops and curls suggested immodesty. Penmanship became a moral statement. Proper letters had straight lines, small spacing, and even pressure. Desire could exist only between the lines, never within them. Still, not everyone obeyed. Some letters survived that broke every rule. In 1880, an anonymous London woman wrote to her lover, I dream of your breath upon my neck, though I dare not write what I feel. She burned the letter after reading it, then copied it again in safer form, replacing the body with metaphors about storms and summer air. The destroyed draft was her true confession. The copy was her disguise. Men faced fewer consequences for boldness, but even they chose restraint. A gentleman could not appear crude. Politeness was power. In this world, to suggest without saying became the ultimate skill. The more indirect the message, the deeper its meaning. The coded letter also crossed social lines. Servants, clerks, and factory workers wrote love notes on scraps of paper, hidden in lunch tins or beneath coal buckets. They used nicknames, inside jokes, and shared objects as symbols. A button, a ribbon, a lock of hair. All stood for emotions that words could not safely express. Even among the poor, discretion was survival. Scandal could cost employment, shelter, or worse. During the Crimean War, soldiers wrote to their sweethearts with the same caution. Military censors read outgoing mail. To evade them, soldiers described longing as homesickness or fatigue. The letters rarely mentioned the body, but between the lines lay tenderness. "The nights are long," one soldier wrote, "and I think of the candlelight at your window." His wife, reading it, understood everything he could not say. The culture of coded affection reflected something deeper about the Victorian mind. They believed that virtue was not only in what one did but in what one did not say. Silence became moral currency. Every avoided word was a badge of restraint. But silence also bred imagination. The forbidden took on new shapes, symbols, scents, metaphors. The Victorians, in trying to suppress passion, gave birth to subtlety. You might picture one such scene. A young woman at her writing desk, the gaslight trembling, her hand trembling more. She chooses paper with a faint lavender border. Her mother sits nearby, reading the Times. The girl writes, "I hope your health improves with the warmer air." What she means is, "I dream of you." When she seals the envelope, her pulse races. It will travel miles through many hands to one pair of eyes that will understand. The coded letter was both risk and refuge. It allowed intimacy in a world that denied it. It gave lovers control in a society that offered little. And yet, each note carried danger. Every envelope was a gamble against exposure. You may wonder how many secrets were lost in the postal system, how many confessions burned before delivery, how many lovers spoke only in metaphors until death. The records cannot tell us. History remembers kings, wars, and inventions. It rarely records the quiet exchange of letters between two people who dared to write what they could not say. But for the Victorians, those letters were everything. They were proof that feeling could survive restraint, that even in a world of manners and rules, emotion found a way to speak. You receive the letter 3 days later. It is folded twice, sealed with a pressed flower. The address is written neatly in ink that smells faintly of lavender. You hesitate before opening it. You know it has passed through many hands, the post clerk, the delivery boy, perhaps even your landlady. Every step risked discovery, every mile another chance for ruin. Yet you open it anyway. The envelope tears softly, like a sigh. The handwriting is delicate, careful, each loop of every word restrained. The letter begins with ordinary pleasantries. The weather, the health of a family member, the arrival of spring. But beneath these lines, you read something else entirely. The phrase, "the garden looks alive again," feels like more than a description. You know what it means. The garden is the code, and life means love. This is how Victorians survived the weight of their own restraint. They turned emotion into craftsmanship. Writing became an act of translation, taking feeling and disguising it as decorum. Lovers became linguists of longing. The secrecy extended beyond lovers. Even married couples used subtle phrasing in letters, especially when separated by travel. Passion could not appear on paper that might be seen by servants or colleagues. So they used a shared vocabulary of allusions, words that sounded polite but carried private meaning. "The clock seems slow without you," one husband wrote to his wife. "The hours are long and empty." She would read this and understand, "I miss you in bed." Every household that valued reputation also feared paper. A careless sentence could live forever. The destruction of letters became part of etiquette. Many Victorians burned entire collections of correspondence before death. They believed that privacy should die with the person. The result is a gap in history, a silence where human stories once lived. What remains are the survivors, letters spared by chance, discovered in attics, folded into books, or preserved by descendants too sentimental to destroy them. These fragments reveal the fine art of saying nothing and meaning everything. One of the most delicate examples comes from the novelist Thomas Hardy. His letters to his first wife, Emma, reveal affection buried under politeness. Hardy was no romantic idealist. His words were plain, sometimes cold, but hidden between the mundane sentences, discussions of house repairs, weather, and errands, was tenderness too fragile to name. After Emma's death, Hardy found her old letters and realized their unspoken devotion. He spent his final years writing poems for her. The love had been there all along, quiet, disguised by the habits of their time. In this culture of silence, writing became a test of restraint. Young women were taught in finishing schools to avoid unguarded expression. Manuals advised, do not allow feeling to overtake reason upon the page. Even a slight hint of emotion could be judged as impropriety. Letters were not merely communication, they were evidence of character. Men faced their own restrictions. A gentleman's letter was expected to sound dignified, calm, rational. Too much emotion hinted at weakness. Too little, and he risked seeming cold. The right tone balanced formality and warmth. Many practiced for hours before sending a single note, drafting and redrafting to remove any sign of desperation. But under this tension, something beautiful happened. Language itself evolved. Words gained layers. Phrases became vessels of subtlety. I think of your company could mean, I desire you. I recall our last conversation might recall a touch. Each sentence carried two meanings, one for the reader, one for society. Even punctuation mattered. A dash, a pause, a long space before a signature. All hinted at hesitation, intimacy, or fear. Letters were choreography on paper. The distance between lines mirrored the distance between people. In middle-class homes, daughters often shared desks, ink and paper. Privacy was rare, so clever writers learned to conceal their letters. Some wrote on the inside of folded newspapers. Others hid messages within recipes or copied poems with coded meanings. To my friend might disguise to my love. Poems by Tennyson and Shelley became convenient camouflage for longing. To quote them was safe. To feel them was dangerous. Among the working class, the struggle was different. Many could not write fluently, so their letters were short and plain. Yet their simplicity carried honesty that richer households could not afford. I hope you are well. I miss your smile. One miner wrote to his fiancée in 1875. No code, no disguise, just the truth. Those letters, though less polished, carried more courage than many written behind lace curtains. Censorship shaped this language as much as emotion did. The British Post Office employed inspectors who read suspicious letters. They looked for sedition, blasphemy, or anything improper. Lovers learned to write as if watched, turning every letter into a quiet act of rebellion. The postal workers themselves became silent witnesses to national intimacy. They carried hundreds of thousands of sealed envelopes each day. They knew the weight of secrets but could not speak them. For a penny stamp, love traveled across towns and oceans under their hands. Distance created its own beauty. Lovers who might never meet again still wrote. Letters crossed continents, to India, to Africa, to Australia, carrying traces of perfume and pressed violets. Some took months to arrive, others never did. The ocean kept many confessions. Yet people continued to write, knowing their words might vanish. To write was to defy distance and decorum alike. One remarkable exchange between an English governess and a colonial officer in Bombay survived in full. Her letters, preserved by his descendants, never once used the word love, yet every paragraph breathes it. I trust you are not overworked by the sun, she writes. Do take your tea in shade. He replies, the nights here are quiet, though I long for the sound of home. Together, they built a small world of care disguised as courtesy. When he died in 1879, Her last letter was returned unopened. It was sealed with a blue ribbon. Such stories show how the Victorians redefined intimacy. It was not measured by touch or speech, but by shared secrecy. The act of hiding made the feeling stronger. To love meant to protect the letter as much as the person. As the century progressed, the language of letters began to shift. The late Victorians, influenced by new psychology and freer art, experimented with openness. Poets like Swinburne and Rossetti wrote with sensual clarity, though still behind veils of metaphor. Their work shocked critics but fascinated readers. The public condemned what it secretly admired. This double standard extended to women writers as well. When female authors published bold letters or poems, society labeled them fallen, yet readers devoured their words. Mary Wollstonecraft's letters, reprinted decades after her death, caused a scandal precisely because they were honest. Her daughter, Mary Shelley, inherited both the courage and the caution. She wrote of longing in riddles, her sentences half-truths, her feelings buried under myth. In every class, secrecy became survival. Even servants wrote with codes of their own. They borrowed words from their employer's vocabulary, twisting formality into disguise. "My position remains agreeable," one maid wrote to a suitor, meaning, "I am still under watch." He replied, "I await your next market day," meaning, "Meet me behind the church. You stand in a new century." The year is 1901. Queen Victoria is dead, and with her ends the longest reign in British history. The nation mourns, yet something in the air feels lighter. The weight of her moral shadow begins to lift. People still write letters, but the tone changes. The ink no longer trembles with fear. It begins to breathe. Victorian restraint, once a badge of honor, starts to feel old-fashioned. The sons and daughters of the stiff, coded letter writers inherit their pens but not their caution. The new generation has seen too much to pretend. They have read Darwin, Marx, and Freud. They have seen industrial cities grow, and with them, anonymity. Morality now competes with modern life. The love letter transforms with the times. It grows shorter, freer, more honest. Words that once needed disguise become direct. "I miss you" replaces, "I think often of your company." "I desire you" replaces, "The weather grows warm." It is not rebellion for its own sake. It is exhaustion. After a century of hiding, people are tired of pretending that emotion is indecent. Yet the old habits die slowly. Many still fear exposure. The etiquette of secrecy remains, even as language loosens. Women, still judged by reputation, walk a careful line. They might confess affection but not longing. They might write boldly, but only if their letters stay hidden. By 1910, love letters take new forms. Telegrams, postcards, and typed notes replace handwritten pages. The tone is brisk, practical, efficient. The slow romance of ink fades into the speed of machines. The world becomes louder. Factories hum. Trains move faster. Lovers now have less time to hide behind metaphors. Still, the old codes linger in certain circles. In literary salons, artists and poets continue the art of secret writing. The Bloomsbury Group writes of emotion with intellectual calm. Writers like Virginia Woolf and Vita Sackville West exchange letters filled with meaning disguised as philosophy. They live in a world more open yet still cautious. Their affection exists in language, not public declaration. The Victorian habit of suggestion survives, refined but not erased. You might think of how this change feels for the ordinary person. A clerk in Manchester writes to his sweetheart now on plain paper, with no floral borders or perfumes. "Work keeps me long hours," he says, "but your letter brightened the day." The words are simple, not coded, but they carry the same devotion. He signs, "Yours, Tom." It is a small victory of honesty over formality. For the first time, working people can speak without apology. Education spreads. Literacy becomes common. The letter, once a luxury of the polite, becomes a right. Love no longer needs translation through metaphor. But something is lost too. The coded letters, the pressed flowers, the careful ink, all vanish into modernity. Privacy becomes rare. The intimacy of hidden language, the slow waiting for a letter to arrive, the trembling of a wax seal, all belong to another age. Progress leaves beauty behind. Historians who study the era often find this change bittersweet. The Victorians, for all their repression, gave the world a form of written tenderness unmatched since. Their restraint made their words more powerful. Every phrase was weighed, every pause intentional. Modern letters, in comparison, seem hurried. Where Victorians wrote to hide their hearts, modern lovers write to empty them quickly. Still, the old letters survive in archives, private collections, and forgotten trunks. Each one is a time capsule of a world that tried to discipline emotion but ended up documenting it instead. The paper yellows, the ink fades, but the feelings remain. A researcher in the British Library once opened a sealed packet of Victorian correspondence labeled private. Do not destroy. Inside were 24 letters between a governess and her employer's son. Their writing began formally as etiquette required. "Sir," she wrote. "Miss," he replied. Over the years, their greetings softened. "My dear friend" became "dearest." In the final letter, written just before he left for India, the words were plain, "I love you," 3 words that would have been unthinkable 20 years earlier. It marked a small, quiet rebellion, the end of coded restraint. Yet even now, long after their deaths, the story feels intimate. You can almost sense their hesitation, the pen pressing harder at that final line, the breath held as ink dries. It is not only love on that paper, it is courage. Technology changes everything. Telephones arrive, voices replace ink. The art of patience disappears. People no longer wait weeks for a reply. The slow dance of distance ends. But each new tool brings a different form of vulnerability. A spoken confession vanishes as soon as it is said. A written one remains. That permanence once frightened Victorians. Now it frightens no one, though perhaps it should. As time moves on, historians and readers look back with curiosity. They see how an empire obsessed with repression accidentally preserved some of the most passionate words ever written. The letters that survived did so because they were disguised as harmless. A mother saving her daughter's friendly correspondence might never know she was preserving a love story. The language of flowers fades into memory, though it leaves traces in poetry and art. Red roses still mean passion, lilies still purity. The Victorian code outlives the Victorians. You can picture one final scene. An elderly woman sits by a window in 1915. The war has taken her husband, her brothers, her son. In a small box beside her are letters from her youth. She reads one, "I hope your garden blooms again." She smiles faintly. No one else in the world would know that the sentence once meant, "I love you." The words outlived the writer, the reader, the moral codes, and the empire that created them. The ink has faded, but its meaning has not. The code was always more than secrecy. It was proof that emotion cannot be erased, only transformed. Modern readers often laugh at the Victorians, calling them prudish. But the truth is more complex. Their restraint was a kind of bravery. They lived in a world that punished openness and still found ways to express tenderness through silence. They spoke in symbols not because they lacked courage, but because they lived in cages built from rules. Writing was how they carved small openings in those walls. And though the cages are gone, you may wonder if the silence has truly vanished. Every age finds new ways to hide its heart. Social media, polite distance, irony. The forms change. The instinct remains. So when you next see an old letter behind glass, look closely. The ink is more than ink. The folds are more than paper. They are the heartbeat of a world that learned how to love quietly. And as you close this story, let one question linger in your mind. Did the Victorians hide their love, or did they, in their silence, make it last longer than anyone else ever could? The corset and the body. You wake to the sound of laces tightening. The day begins not with sunlight but with pressure. It is 1874, and you are a respectable woman in London. Your maid pulls the corset strings while you hold the bedpost. Each tug shapes your body into the image of virtue. You gasp slightly but say nothing. The corset is not just clothing. It is identity, duty, and armor. In the mirror, your waist narrows. Your posture straightens. You can barely breathe, yet you look correct. The corset has done its job. Society calls it beauty. You call it normal. Victorian England built its ideals on control. The corset symbolized that control better than any sermon. It promised elegance, discipline, and modesty. It also promised pain. Doctors warned against tight lacing, yet the fashion persisted. A small waist meant moral strength, not weakness. Women wore their restraint proudly. The body became proof of character. Corsets were everywhere. From duchesses to maids, all wore some version of them. Silk and whalebone for the rich, cotton and steel for the poor. The tightness varied, but the meaning stayed the same. Beauty was obedience. To loosen it was to risk gossip. Mothers taught daughters how to lace properly. The lesson began in adolescence, often before a girl's body had finished growing. A well-shaped waist was considered essential for a good marriage. Manuals advised that a woman's form must display her virtue as much as her attire. The waist became a moral boundary line. The corset's origins went back centuries, but the Victorians perfected it. Advances in steel production allowed flexible busks and stronger boning. Sewing machines made mass production possible. Department stores displayed rows of corsets in all sizes, colors, and styles. Some even advertised medical benefits, claiming that corsets improved posture and digestion. The truth was less graceful. Many women fainted from lack of air. Organs shifted. Doctors noted cases of compressed ribs, dislocated livers, and even fainting spells at social events. Still, fashion magazines praised the wasp waist. The smaller the measurement, the higher the admiration. A 20-inch waist was considered ideal. Some claimed to reach 18. Whether true or not, the goal remained the same, to be bound. Yet the corset was more than torture. It was also expression. Women used it to shape not only their bodies but their public identity. To dress without one was to invite suspicion. Even early feminists wore corsets, arguing that rejection of beauty standards might undermine their credibility. Respectability had rules, and even rebellion followed them. Beneath these layers of fabric, a quiet hypocrisy thrived. The same culture that demanded female modesty also celebrated the corseted form in art and advertising. Pain was eroticized. Curves constrained by laces became symbols of desire in paintings and poems. The male gaze admired what it also restricted. The corset became both prison and invitation. You imagine a ballroom at dusk. Dozens of women glide beneath chandeliers, their waists impossibly narrow, their smiles faint but polite. Each step requires balance. Each breath must be calculated. Behind the fans and laughter lies endurance. They have trained for this their entire lives, to move gracefully while constrained. But in private rooms, when the laces loosen, the truth returns. Women unhook their stays, inhale deeply, and feel the rush of blood and breath. Some describe this moment as freedom, others as shame. The body they see in the mirror without the corset looks unfamiliar. Without structure, it feels formless. Writers of the time noticed this contradiction. Charlotte Perkins Gilman, in her essays, described how fashion enslaved the female body. She argued that clothing revealed the deeper illness of society, the belief that women existed to be displayed. "We decorate what we imprison," she wrote. The body becomes an ornament when the mind is denied. Even male reformers joined the debate. Doctors, journalists, and preachers discussed the corset problem. Health movements like the Rational Dress Society appeared in the 1880s. They called for clothing that allowed freedom of movement. They were mocked as radicals, accused of indecency for suggesting that women should breathe. Still, the movement grew quietly. At the same time, the corset industry flourished. In 1885, British factories produced more than 1 million corsets per year. Advertisements promised comfort without compromise. Companies like Thompson's and Warner's introduced new designs labeled ventilated or anatomical. The marketing was clever, reform disguised as fashion. The paradox deepened as technology advanced. The same machines that powered industry also powered repression. Steel frames held bridges and bodies alike. Progress and control marched together. Yet within this control, small rebellions began. Women adjusted their laces slightly looser. Some wore health corsets that emphasized posture instead of reduction. Others experimented with underbust designs that allowed more freedom. These small acts, invisible to the public, carried quiet defiance. Letters from ordinary women reveal the emotional side of this transformation. One housemaid wrote in 1872, "I cannot work well when laced so tight, yet the mistress says it looks unseemly if I do not. I loosen mine after she sleeps." A middle-class mother wrote to her daughter, "You must learn endurance. A lady's strength is shown by her stillness." These words capture the contradiction of the age. Pain as virtue, silence as dignity. The corset also created a shared experience among women. It was something all endured regardless of class. In a way, it united them through discomfort. The act of lacing another woman's corset, often done by servants or sisters, was intimate and unspoken. It required trust, precision, and care. Within those small acts of assistance lay a quiet form of solidarity. You can imagine that morning ritual. The faint scent of starch, the rustle of petticoats, the slow tightening of strings. Two women breathe together, one pulling, one bracing. They say little. The sound of fabric and breath is enough. Over time, even men began to wear corsets, especially in high society. They claimed it improved posture or fit for uniforms. Some did it for fashion alone. The line between discipline and vanity blurred. The corset became a symbol not of gender but of status, a physical sign of belonging to the refined world. By the late Victorian era, the debate over the corset had become public. Medical journals printed diagrams showing the displacement of organs. Reformers staged exhibitions comparing the natural waist to the artificially shaped. Society ladies scoffed at these demonstrations while secretly curious. Change, when it came, would come slowly. The corset, in all its beauty and cruelty, stood as the perfect metaphor for its age. A society obsessed with surface perfection, willing to suffer for the illusion of control. It held together not only the body but the entire moral structure of the time. You sit again at the mirror, laces loosen now. The marks on your skin fade slowly. Your reflection is softer, almost unfamiliar. The corset lies folded beside you, silent but powerful, an object that shaped more than fashion. It shaped how women understood themselves. You wonder quietly, was the corset truly about beauty? Or was it about teaching women how to carry the weight of a world that never allowed them to breathe freely? You rise from the dressing table and step carefully across the polished floor. The corset is tight, your breath shallow, but your reflection pleases you. The shape of your waist fits the image that society demands. Every inch of your body is measured against expectation. The corset does not just change how you look, it changes how you move, how you sit, how you exist. The Victorians saw appearance as morality made visible. To look proper was to be proper. Clothing became a test of character. The corset, the most private piece of fashion, became the public symbol of virtue. A woman who wore it well appeared composed and controlled. A woman who did not invited judgment. Etiquette books confirmed this belief. They spoke of posture as the first mark of refinement. A straight back meant self-command. A slouch meant laziness of both body and spirit. The corset enforced this rule with steel and fabric. Kept the spine erect, the chest lifted, the shoulders drawn back. The body became a structure of obedience. Yet obedience had its price. Women were expected to perform composure even in discomfort. To win social approval, they had to pretend the pain did not exist. "A lady never complains," one guidebook said. "Her suffering is unseen." The act of silence was as important as the shape of the waist. This silence extended beyond fashion. The corset symbolized control over emotion, desire, and ambition. A well-laced woman looked calm, even if her lungs burned. The restraint of the body mirrored the restraint of the soul. In this way, fashion became philosophy. Illustrations in women's magazines captured the dream of perfection. Elegant silhouettes in flowing gowns filled their pages. Beneath those gowns, the reality remained invisible. Tight laces bit into flesh, metal stays bruised ribs, and fainting chairs became fixtures in parlors. The culture praised delicacy but punished weakness. If a woman collapsed, she was seen as fragile and feminine, exactly as society desired. Corsets also reinforced hierarchy. The ability to wear one properly required leisure. Working women could not afford fainting spells. They needed mobility. Their corsets were shorter, looser, more practical. Respectable ladies, meanwhile, could display restriction as luxury. The less they could move, the higher their status appeared. Immobility became elegance. The paradox reached into every layer of daily life. Meals were smaller, breaths shallower, gestures slower. Even laughter had to be controlled. Too much movement might break the illusion. The corset created an entire language of refinement. Grace became discipline disguised as beauty. But within that discipline, cracks began to show. By the 1880s, new ideas about health challenged the culture of restriction. Doctors studying anatomy began linking corsetry to respiratory illness and fainting fits. Public health campaigns warned mothers not to lace their daughters too early. Newspapers published sketches of distorted skeletons. The images shocked readers but changed little at first. Fashion had deeper roots than reason. Still, some women listened. They began forming small discussion groups under names like the Rational Dress Society and the Hygienic Clothing League. Their meetings were quiet, polite, and revolutionary. They spoke of comfort, mobility, and freedom, not as rebellion but as common sense. Their arguments spread through pamphlets and women's journals. The idea was simple. If progress defined the century, why should fashion remain medieval? Their proposals were modest, looser stays, lighter fabrics, and natural waistlines, but they faced ridicule. Critics accused them of promoting indecency. A woman who refused a corset risked being labeled immoral. The irony was complete. To breathe freely became an act of scandal. Despite this resistance, change crept in. Technology once again played its part. Elastic fabric, patented in the 1880s, allowed new flexibility. Liberty bodices offered gentle shaping without bone or steel. Advertisers promoted them as modern comfort. Slowly, younger women adopted these alternatives, especially those who cycled, skated, or worked in offices. Sport became a surprising ally of freedom. As physical activity gained respectability, clothing adapted. Gymnasiums opened for women. Bicycles became fashionable. The corset, designed for stillness, struggled against motion. Photographs of women riding bicycles in rational dress shocked conservatives. Yet progress rarely reversed. Once women discovered how it felt to move, they did not forget. Writers began using the corset as metaphor. Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House portrayed marriage itself as a kind of corset, beautiful, rigid, and suffocating. George Egerton, in her short stories, described heroines loosening their stays as symbolic of awakening. The gesture became political. To unlace was to think. Still, the old standard endured among the powerful. In high society, corsetry remained the uniform of respectability. Portraits of queens and duchesses reinforced the ideal. Even the young Princess Alexandra, admired for her slender figure, admitted to tight lacing since childhood. Her example kept the practice alive long after reformers declared victory. Corset makers adapted again. They designed reducing corsets, claiming to slim the body permanently through constant pressure. Advertisements showed before and after silhouettes, promising beauty without effort. It was a new version of the same illusion, pain disguised as progress. Letters from the time reveal the psychological hold of the corset. One woman wrote in 1896, "I feel unmade without it. My back weakens, my spirits fall." Another confessed, "I know it harms me, but it gives me courage to face the world." The corset had become a second skin, a necessary disguise. The paradox extended into medical practice. Some doctors prescribed corsets to women suffering from nervous weakness, arguing that physical support aided moral strength. Others condemned the same garment as the cause of their illness. The debate turned circular. Women were blamed for fainting, then blamed again for abandoning the thing that caused it. For many, there was simply no choice. The corset was required by fashion, demanded by employers, and reinforced by peers. Even the act of buying one involved ritual. In department stores, saleswomen measured clients discreetly, avoiding direct touch. Privacy screens separated fittings. Each purchase ended with the same sentence: "You look much improved, madam." Improvement meant conformity. You can imagine the scene. The fitting room quiet except for the creak of laces and the faint hum of conversation. The woman in the mirror smiles politely. The corset holds her upright, but her shoulders ache. The clerk nods approvingly. Both know this is how it must be. The strangest part of the corset's history is how deeply it shaped identity. To wear one was not merely to follow fashion, but to inhabit a worldview. It defined posture, emotion, even morality. Without it, many felt exposed, as if naked not in body but in social worth. The corset became invisible not because it was hidden under clothing, but because it was accepted as natural. The years ahead would bring revolution. Women would vote, work, and fight wars. Yet the ghost of the corset would follow them. Even when steel gave way to elastic and laces to hooks, the pressure remained, shifted from ribs to mind. Beauty standards never vanished, only evolved. You wake one morning in 1908 to find fashion at war with itself. The corset still hangs in every wardrobe, but something in the world has shifted. Women are working in offices, cycling in the streets, and joining protests for the vote. The air feels different. It is no longer filled with obedience but with questions. For the first time, women ask aloud, "Why must beauty hurt? Why must breathing be a privilege?" The corset, once invisible, becomes a symbol of everything they wish to change. Reformers call it the armor of submission. Artists call it the cage of grace. Both are right. New designers enter the scene, armed not with morality but with imagination. Paul Poiret, a French couturier, declares war on the corset. He introduces dresses that hang loosely from the shoulders, freeing the waist completely. His gowns flow rather than constrict. He claims his designs liberate the body. Critics accuse him of indecency, yet women buy them. They want to feel air against their ribs. Poiret's success spreads. Across Europe and America, fashion begins to move. The ideal shape changes from hourglass to column. The corset industry panics. Manufacturers attempt compromise. The brassiere corset, the reform corset, the invisible support. But the world is already learning to breathe. The movement grows not through rebellion but practicality. The First World War approaches, and corsets meet their match not in protest but in necessity. Steel, once used for stays, is needed for weapons. The U.S. War Industries Board urges women to stop buying corsets to save metal. Magazines publish patriotic slogans. Loose your laces for victory. For the first time in history, liberation is framed as duty. Millions comply. Factories retool. The old rhythm of lacing each morning fades. When the war ends, the corset never fully returns. The body, once molded by metal, begins to define itself. Still, nostalgia lingers. Some women feel lost without the structure. Letters from the 1920s describe discomfort, not physical but emotional. "I miss the order," one woman wrote. "Without my stays, I feel unfinished." The corset had been more than clothing. It had been routine, ritual, even identity. But for younger women, freedom means energy. The new decade belongs to them. They dance, they smoke, they work. Fashion adapts. The flapper silhouette celebrates the natural body. Corsets give way to light girdles, designed for movement rather than stillness. The old world of whalebone and lace becomes a memory whispered by grandmothers. Yet the corset never dies completely, transforms. It hides under new names, foundation garments, shapewear, control belts. Advertisements promise comfort and confidence. The vocabulary changes, but the message remains. The ideal body is not yours. It is one you must create. Historians later call this transformation progress. They are partly right. The physical pain lessens, but the psychological pressure deepens. The corset leaves the body and enters the mind. Now the discipline comes from mirrors, magazines, and cinema. The gaze of others replaces the tug of laces. When women look back on the Victorian age, they see both oppression and elegance. The photographs of that time, tiny waists, high collars, elaborate gowns, carry a strange nostalgia. The corset, stripped of its daily cruelty, becomes a symbol of mystery and romance. Films and novels of the 20th century revive it as costume, not constraint. It is worn again, but for pleasure, not propriety. The irony is complete. What was once the mark of virtue becomes the symbol of seduction. The corset that punished desire now decorates it. Pain becomes style again, though for different reasons. Fashion, it seems, cannot live without contradiction. You can picture a modern dressing room in 1930. A woman stands before her mirror, wearing a silk girdle instead of a steel corset. It shapes her, but gently. The electric light hums above her. She fastens a single hook, inhales, and feels control, not forced but chosen. For the first time in centuries, the illusion belongs to her. Yet the corset's history remains written in her reflection. The posture, the straight back, the careful stance, all inherited from the generations before. The body remembers what society taught it. To be admired is to be contained. By mid-century, women's magazines celebrate freedom of movement. They show tennis players, swimmers, and workers. The language is confident, even modern. But between the lines lies a new demand. To stay slim, to stay smooth, to stay desirable. The corset is gone, but its logic survives. Control is now invisible, internalized. Psychologists later described this transition as discipline without devices. The Victorians used metal. Modern culture uses mirrors. The result is the same: perfection through pressure. Even so, something valuable endures from the age of laces and stays. The discipline that once oppressed women also trained them in resilience. To endure daily discomfort while smiling required strength. The same strength later fueled movements for reform, education, and equality. The corset that confined them also prepared them to fight. In this light, the corset becomes more than an object of repression. It is a relic of adaptation. It shows how people survived beauty's demands, how they learned to exist within cages until they could unmake them. You imagine a woman standing before her mirror one last time before the war, her corset folded neatly beside her. She touches it, not with hatred, but with understanding. It shaped her in every sense of the word. She smiles faintly, then closes the drawer. The sound of steel on wood marks the end of an era. Modern scholars still debate whether the corset was oppression or art. The truth lies between. It was both, a tool of control and a masterpiece of design. It revealed the tension between body and society, between appearance and freedom. It turned discipline into beauty and beauty into endurance. The story of the corset is, at its heart, the story of the human desire to control what cannot be controlled. The body's truth. Every lace pulled tight was a small denial of nature. Every loosening was a quiet return to it. And so the corset's legacy endures not in steel but in thought. We still tighten ourselves in different ways, through expectation, through comparison, through the quiet voice that says, "Not enough." The mirror, once an ally, remains a judge. You close your eyes and picture the sound of laces loosening. It is soft, steady, almost musical. A breath follows. The air rushes back in. For the first time in generations, the body is free. The ribs expand. The lungs fill. The silence breaks. The corset lies still, a relic of grace and pain. And as you drift toward sleep, one thought remains. Did the corset shape the woman, or did the woman's endurance give shape to the age itself? The gentlemen's clubs, respectable facades, and hidden affairs. You enter through heavy oak doors into a room lined with silence and smoke. It is 1889, London's St. James's Street. The gaslights flicker against marble floors. A butler in dark uniform nods without speaking. The scent of tobacco and polish fills the air. This is no tavern, no public house. This is a gentleman's club. To the outside world, these clubs represent order, intellect, and refinement. Inside, they are sanctuaries for men who wish to escape their homes, their families, and the polite moral scrutiny of society. Here, reputation is protected by architecture. Every wall absorbs secrets. Every servant knows to forget. The Victorian Gentlemen's Club began as an extension of the drawing room. In theory, it offered a space for conversation, reading, and rest. In practice, it was an empire of privilege. Membership required money, education, and the correct kind of birth. No woman could enter except to serve. The rules were strict. The atmosphere was sacred. Respectability lived here, or so the members believed. The clubs multiplied across London like temples of discretion. The Athenaeum for thinkers, the Reform for liberals, the Carlton for conservatives, the Garrick for actors. Each had its own culture, its own silence, and its own sins. To the casual observer, the club was calm. Men read newspapers by the fire. They discussed politics, railways, or colonial affairs. Waiters moved soundlessly, serving whiskey and soup. But beneath the stillness lay a current of tension, a quiet competition of power, status, and desire. The club was the man's refuge from a moral world that demanded self-control. Here, he could loosen his collar, swear softly, and speak truths he would never say at home. The club was permission disguised as propriety. Many joined for companionship, others for escape. Marriage, once seen as duty, often grew distant under the weight of etiquette. The club offered something safer than scandal and more comforting than silence. It was the approved form of absence. Letters and diaries from the time reveal how deep this separation ran. One banker wrote, "The club is my home, the house but my residence." Another confessed, "I return at midnight not from temptation but from rest." The difference was small but significant. The home demanded virtue. The club demanded only discretion. The line between respect and indulgence blurred. Behind polished walls, gambling thrived. Cards clicked softly beneath chandeliers. Men lost fortunes without raising their voices. Debts were discussed in whispers, reputations saved by silence. To fall from grace was not to lose wealth, but to be expelled. Exclusion meant exile from manhood itself. Women watched from outside, excluded from these quiet empires. Wives and daughters saw the carriages waiting at midnight, the unread books, the dinners gone cold. They knew the club's power. To challenge it was to challenge a system that defined their own social survival. A well-connected husband meant stability. His club membership was part of that bargain. Yet not every room in every club was so respectable. Some hid more than conversation. Certain private chambers, known only to trusted members, hosted evenings of quiet vice. The clubs of Piccadilly and Pall Mall were rumored to host card games that lasted until dawn, brandy-fueled confessions, and the company of women brought in through back entrances. No newspaper ever printed such stories. The press, owned by the same men, maintained the illusion. The public saw only polished respectability. Behind the oak doors, power and pleasure mixed freely. The architecture itself encouraged secrecy. Corridors were narrow, staircases steep, rooms soundproofed with heavy drapes. Doors opened onto antechambers before leading to the main halls, ensuring that no sound traveled beyond permission. Even the lighting was deliberate, dim enough to hide expressions, bright enough to suggest civility. Membership required sponsorship. One did not simply apply. 2 current members had to vouch for your character, and 3 could block your name. Votes were cast in silence using black and white balls. A single black ball meant rejection. Hence the term blackballed. The process reinforced exclusivity. The club was a fortress of chosen men. Inside these fortresses, decisions were made that shaped empires. Colonial policies, railway contracts, and political alliances often began over brandy at midnight. History books record Parliament's debates, but not the whispers that preceded them in the smoking rooms. The club was power in its most comfortable form. Soft chairs, quiet voices, and absolute confidence. This system worked because it disguised privilege as tradition. The rituals of dining, reading, and quiet conversation gave moral cover to men who controlled wealth and law. They could speak of charity while speculating in opium. They could toast to virtue while maintaining mistresses. The decorum protected the contradiction. To visit one of these clubs today is to step into a preserved illusion. The chairs are the same. The portraits remain on the walls. Faces of men who shaped nations yet never did their own laundry. Their rules still hang in frames. No women, no dogs, no politics at dinner. The past lingers in polished silence. But to understand the power of the Victorian club, you must imagine the city outside. London was loud, dirty, and restless. Poverty pressed against the walls of wealth. The clubs offered insulation. Inside, the coal fire burned steadily while outside, thousands shivered. This separation was not accidental, it was design. The gentleman's club was the quiet engine of inequality, wrapped in velvet. And yet, it was also human. The men inside were not villains but prisoners of their own decorum. Their emotions were bound by the same rules they enforced. They could confess failure only as humor, affection only as advice. The club allowed companionship without vulnerability. It offered the illusion of intimacy without the risk of truth. You picture one member sitting by the window at dusk, a cigar in hand. His wife's letter lies unopened in his pocket. He reads the Times instead. The city glows beyond the glass. He feels both powerful and alone. The club protects him from shame but not from emptiness. By the end of the century, even these sanctuaries began to change. Scandals crept in. The Oscar Wilde trials of 1895 shook London's moral foundation. Suddenly, whispers carried weight. Men who once joked freely about aesthetic tastes grew cautious. Respectability, once a shield, became fragile. Clubs tightened rules, banned certain members, and reinforced silence. In public, they claimed virtue. In private, they grew fearful. The world was shifting. The empire that had built its confidence on moral order began to sense its own hypocrisy. The butlers noticed first. Servants who had stood unseen for decades began to talk, discreetly but truthfully, to outsiders. Memoirs appeared describing the inner life of these institutions, the indulgence, the cruelty, the loneliness. Readers were shocked, not by the behavior itself, but by its familiarity. Everyone had suspected. Now it was confirmed. You can almost hear the echo of those footsteps in the corridor, the sound of a civilization walking carefully over its own secrets. The club remained outwardly serene, its fire eternal, its members polite. But beneath the silence, something restless stirred. You returned to the club the next day. The same door, the same silence. Inside, nothing changes quickly. Time here moves slower than the city outside. The world might invent telegraphs, steamships, and electric light, but the club stays loyal to its own rhythm. Tradition is its greatest currency. A bell rings faintly. It is time for luncheon. Men file into the dining hall in pairs or small groups, each dressed in the same dark suit. The sound of cutlery and quiet laughter fills the air. A waiter announces dishes in a low voice: roast beef, kidney pie, cold game. The food is ordinary, but the ritual makes it sacred. To eat together without speaking of business is the club's highest rule. It is a performance of self-control. Every gesture is choreographed. The napkin folded just so. The voice never raised. The laughter brief. To show too much emotion, even joy is considered vulgar. The club teaches that composure equals power. Power hides well here. It rarely announces itself. The man reading by the fireplace might be a member of parliament. The one studying his newspaper could own half the railways in India. But inside these walls, they are equals. Money and influence exist, but hierarchy is subtle. The only unforgivable sin is self-importance. Still, conversations shape history. A casual remark about coal prices becomes a government policy. A discussion about a railway loan becomes a war. These decisions are not recorded. They exist in memory and in silence. The minutes of the empire are written in smoke. But not every member holds power. Many come only for the illusion of belonging. The club offers safety to those who feel irrelevant outside it. For retired colonels, aging barristers, and forgotten politicians, this is the last stage where they still matter. The butler remembers their names. The chair by the fire remembers their shape. In a world that moves on, the club stays still. Yet stillness carries decay. Behind the polished mirrors, boredom grows. The endless rituals, lunch, reading, cards, cigars, begin to blur together. For some, it is peace. For others, it is slow suffocation. Diaries from this period reveal a quiet despair. One member wrote, "I have been here every day for 20 years, yet no one has spoken my name aloud since '84. Another described the place as a mausoleum with servants. The younger members, restless and modern, find the silence unbearable. They sneak out to less respectable clubs, the ones in Soho and Covent Garden, where laughter is louder and company more diverse. These inferior establishments admit actors, artists, and foreign guests. They drink, flirt, and argue politics. To the old guard, they are chaos. To the young, they are life. This generational divide grows through the 1890s. The older men cling to ritual, the younger crave authenticity. The result is friction under velvet. Clubs split, new ones form, and old names lose prestige. The age of solemn order gives way to something more uncertain. Outside the club walls, London changes faster. Women march for suffrage. Machines replace men in factories. Newspapers expose corruption with fearless tone. The empire's self-confidence begins to crack. Yet inside the clubs, the conversation remains the same. Cricket scores, colonial maps, the Queen's health. The distance between the two worlds grows wide. The contradiction becomes impossible to ignore after the wild trials. The event shatters the illusion of moral unity. Many club members, once tolerant of eccentricity, now fear association with scandal. They withdraw into stricter rules, banning discussion of improper topics. Yet gossip still circulates in whispers. Wilde's downfall is discussed as a warning, a lesson in the danger of being seen. The club becomes not just a sanctuary but a fortress against exposure. The irony deepens. The men who condemn public scandal often live private contradictions. Some maintain secret relationships. Others hide gambling debts, unacknowledged children, or quiet affairs. The walls protect not virtue but appearances. And the code of silence becomes absolute. The servants know everything. They see what members try to hide. They notice which letters arrive, which are burned. They hear names spoken in hushed tones, laughter too late at night. Yet they speak to no one. Their loyalty is purchased not just with wages but with dependency. The staff lives within the club but never belongs to it. They are ghosts in its rituals, always present, never acknowledged. A butler named Henry Jones, who served at a Pall Mall club for 40 years, later wrote in his memoirs, "They trusted me because they thought I could not see, but I saw everything." He described how members changed after dinner, voices loosening, hands trembling, confessions half-whispered under the influence of brandy. Respectability, he wrote, was their costume and the club their stage. The empire itself depended on these men. They drafted treaties, signed contracts, and managed colonies. Yet here they were reduced to ritual. Their power was abstract, their lives small. The club gave them certainty. It promised that the world outside, noisy, changing, unpredictable, could never reach this polished interior. But cracks appear even in marble. By 1900, a few reformers begin to question the system. They argue that the clubs preserve idleness, not culture. Essays in the Fortnightly Review and the Spectator describe them as temples of apathy. Some suggest admitting women or younger men. The proposals are laughed off, but the idea has entered the conversation. Not all clubs resist. A few experiment quietly. The Arts Club welcomes painters and writers, including women as guests. The reform allows journalists and politicians of different parties to dine together. These small acts of openness irritate the old institutions but hint at the future. You picture one evening in such a half-modern club around 1902. The room still smells of tobacco and leather, but the talk is different. A young woman, a writer, is invited as a guest. Her presence unsettles the older men, but they are polite. She speaks of progress, of education, of equality. Her tone is calm, not radical, yet every word feels like a match struck in velvet. One man coughs, another shifts uncomfortably. Change has entered the room. Outside, London glows with electric light. Inside, gas lamps still flicker. The contrast is perfect, a city divided between the past and the possible. In this moment, the Gentlemen's Club stands at a crossroads. Its marble pillars and quiet halls still project power, but its meaning is fading. The world no longer believes that silence equals virtue. Respectability without transparency begins to look like deceit. Still, the members cling to routine. Tomorrow, they will return to the same chairs, read the same newspapers, and pretend that the city outside has not moved on. They will toast to stability, unaware that the world they built is already history. You leave the club and step into the street. The air outside feels colder, freer. The sound of horses and carts mixes with laughter from nearby taverns. The difference is clear. Inside is dignity without life. Outside is life without pretense. And you begin to wonder, how many generations mistook silence for strength? How many lives were spent defending walls that kept out not corruption but change itself? You return to St. James's Street in the spring of 1910. The streets are brighter now, lit by electricity. The carriages have grown fewer, replaced by motor cars that cough smoke. London hums with the sound of a new century, yet the club doors remain the same. Oak, brass, silence. The men inside pretend that time itself still asks their permission before it moves. You step through those doors once more, into the world of polished boots and folded newspapers. The same portraits hang on the walls, though their subjects are long dead. The same rules remain written on framed parchment. No women, no discussion of politics at dinner, no display of emotion. But beneath this old calm lies something hollow. The empire that fed these men's confidence now trembles under its own weight. India murmurs of independence. Ireland whispers of rebellion. The colonies demand fairness. Industry has turned the working class into a force the aristocracy can no longer ignore. The power that once gathered quietly in this room now disperses into the streets. Still, the rituals continue. Luncheon, cigars, brandy, cards. The act of repetition feels like prayer. Yet even prayers change meaning when faith begins to fade. The men here still believe they control the world, but the world no longer listens. At one corner table, an aging lord speaks of the Boer War as if it were a parlor game. "Our men did well," he says. "A pity about the press." The others nod politely. No one mentions the cost. Behind the window, a newspaper boy shouts headlines about miners' strikes and hunger marches. The sound is faint but persistent. The walls keep the noise out, but not the future. Some members feel the shift but cannot name it. They complain that conversation has grown dull, that new members lack manners. They mean energy. The younger men no longer sit in silence. They argue, laugh too loudly, even mention women's suffrage. Their fathers shake their heads. The standards are slipping, they mutter. They are right, but for the wrong reasons. Standards are not slipping, they are dissolving. Even the staff notices the change. Waiters who once feared every raised eyebrow now trade small jokes in the kitchen. The hierarchy softens, if only slightly. The formality that defined the age begins to feel absurd. The club survives, but its seriousness does not. By 1914, war erases the illusion completely. The young men who once toasted empire now march into trenches. The club's polished floors grow quieter. Names are crossed out in the membership book, replaced by the word deceased. The silence deepens. When the survivors return, they return changed. They speak less, drink more, and care little for propriety. They have seen too much to respect the old rules. The club becomes a museum of manners, preserved by habit rather than belief. Letters from this period capture the slow unraveling. One colonel wrote, "The club feels like a dream from which no one wakes." Another said, "We sit in our chairs, pretending to belong to a past that no longer exists. The empire has lost its certainty. The club has lost its purpose." In 1918, after the armistice, a few bold members proposed change. They suggest admitting women as guests, hosting lectures, even allowing debates. The proposal fails, but narrowly. The vote reveals the truth. The walls of silence have cracked. Progress waits at the threshold. Outside, London transforms again. Women vote. Automobiles fill the streets. Jazz replaces hymns. Cafes replace clubs as meeting places. The younger generation laughs at the idea of gentlemanly exclusivity. To them, it sounds like nostalgia for irrelevance. Yet the clubs do not vanish. They adapt in their own way quietly. Membership opens slightly, though not enough. The language softens. The smoking rooms turn into lounges. The portraits of empire remain, but no one looks at them for long. The men who built the world of silence now sit beside their sons, unsure what to say. A journalist visiting one such club in 1925 wrote, "It smells of leather, dust, and regret." He observed men reading newspapers about revolutions abroad while pretending none of it mattered. They called it dignity. He called it denial. The great irony of the Gentlemen's Club is that it achieved what it feared most. It became public. Books, memoirs, and novels exposed its hidden world. Writers like Somerset Maugham and Evelyn Waugh turned it into a symbol of fading authority. The mystery dissolved into parody. What was once a fortress of secrecy became a relic of power's decay. Even the architecture betrayed the illusion. The thick carpets and high ceilings, once impressive, now seemed excessive. Visitors described them as quiet tombs. The chandeliers that once reflected triumph now flickered like candles at a wake. The Gentlemen's Club, built to outlast time, became a monument to time's victory. Yet, in a strange way, the club's decline humanized it. The men who remained, retired officers, widowers, and scholars, no longer saw it as a stage for status. They saw it as refuge, place where memory could rest, where rules felt familiar even if they no longer ruled the world. By the mid-20th century, the culture of exclusion had shifted elsewhere, to boardrooms, universities, and politics. The club's influence faded, but its spirit lived on in other forms of quiet gatekeeping. The lesson endured. Power survives best when hidden behind manners. Today, some of these clubs still exist, modernized but haunted. They allow women, accept foreign members, even host lectures on inclusion. The brandy is the same, but the meaning is different. The silence no longer hides secrets, only nostalgia. You walk through one of these clubs now, long after the men who built it have vanished. The portraits stare blankly, their pride turned to myth. The library smells of paper and dust. The chairs by the fire are empty. Only the ticking of a clock remains, steady, patient, polite. The walls no longer protect power. They preserve memory. The voices that once filled the room with confidence now echo faintly in your imagination. "To the empire," they once said, "to respectability." And you wonder, as you stand there in the quiet, whether they ever understood what they built. Whether they realized that their dignity was sustained not by honor, but by silence. The butler's voice breaks your thought. "Would you care for a drink, sir?" he asks. You nod, though the question is centuries too late. The club endures, but the gentlemen are gone. The glass clinks softly as you raise it. The firelight flickers against portraits of forgotten men. For a moment, the air feels full again, of smoke, secrets, and certainty. Then it fades. The silence returns, polite and endless. The age of the gentleman is over, but its lessons remain, quiet as ever. That respectability is never the same as virtue, that silence is not wisdom, and that every institution built to hide desire eventually reveals it. Servants' secrets, what the maids saw but never said. You wake before dawn. The house is still dark. The air smells of coal dust and soap. You move quietly because silence is survival. You are a servant in a Victorian townhouse, one of millions who keep the empire clean, fed, and invisible. Upstairs, your employers sleep beneath heavy curtains and embroidered quilts. Downstairs, the day has already begun. The servants' hall hums with low voices. The cook prepares tea for the household. The butler checks the silver. The maids polish, scrub, and iron in silence. Everything must shine before the family wakes. In this world, your name is known but your life is not. You are spoken of, not spoken to. The family calls you by your role: housemaid, scullery girl, laundress. You live beneath their feet but never in their world. The line is clear: respectability above, necessity below. Yet, in the quiet corners of this hierarchy, the servants see everything. You see the mistress cry when the master stays out too late. You hear arguments through the walls. You find letters hidden behind mirrors, small bottles beneath beds, jewelry returned secretly to boxes after late-night visits. You are the witness history forgets. Servants kept the rhythm of Victorian life. The newspapers spoke of industry and empire, but the true machinery of the age was domestic. Every respectable home relied on invisible labor. Without servants, society would have collapsed before breakfast. In large houses, the staff was an army. But even in modest homes, at least one maid was essential. To be without servants was to be poor, regardless of income. The middle classes measured success not by wealth alone, but by how many people worked for them. For those below stairs, the work was endless. Beds made, coal fires lit, boots blacked, meals carried, chamber pots emptied. The tasks repeated daily with mechanical precision. The hours were long 16, sometimes 18. Rest came only after the family's comfort was secure. You could not speak freely, not even among yourselves. Servants were expected to be discreet. A careless word could end a career. Gossip, though forbidden, was inevitable. It was the only form of rebellion left. In whispered conversations over tea, the staff pieced together the truth of the household. You might know who loved whom, who drank too much, who feared scandal. You might even protect your employers from their own secrets. To speak them aloud was to risk everything. Silence, once learned, became instinct. Letters and memoirs from servants reveal this quiet power. One maid wrote, "We saw the truth of every family, but we carried it like dust, everywhere and never noticed." Another wrote, "We held the key to their lives, and they never imagined we could think." The most trusted servants were the butler and the lady's maid. The butler managed the house, the wine, the keys, and often the secrets. The lady's maid dressed her mistress, cared for her clothes, and heard every confession of vanity, fear, and temptation. In their presence, walls dropped. Trust became dependence, but trust had limits. A servant could be dismissed without notice. A rumor, a glance, or a broken plate could mean unemployment. There were no protections, no savings, no safety nets. To lose one's position was to lose one's life. Many endured cruelty and silence out of necessity. In some households, kindness existed. A fair mistress, a patient cook, a generous butler. These were small blessings in a hard world. But kindness never erased distance. The employer could afford sentiment. The servant could not. Gratitude was expected, not returned. You imagine a grand London townhouse. 6 floors, gas lamps, marble stairs. The master leaves each morning in polished boots, hat shining, newspaper under his arm. The mistress spends her day managing invitations and appearances. Their children play upstairs with a governess. Down below, 20 servants move in quiet coordination. Every task rehearsed, every movement observed. At night, the lines blur. The master drinks too much and wanders the halls. The lady's maid waits for him to pass, eyes lowered. The housekeeper listens to muffled footsteps and prays there will be no scandal. The cook pretends not to hear. The walls hold everything: sin, sorrow, desire, and say nothing. Servants saw it all. The affairs, the cruelty, the hypocrisy hidden beneath prayer books and portraits. They ironed sheets that bore traces of shame. They cleaned rooms where arguments ended in silence. They were the guardians of truth no one wanted spoken. In country estates, the same pattern held. Servants moved through corridors like shadows. They saw lords and ladies at their most human. They knew who paid the bills late, who visited whom after dark, who planned to marry for money and who for survival. Yet the servants' own lives remained invisible. History recorded their employers' names, not theirs. This invisibility gave them a strange kind of freedom. They could observe without consequence, if they stayed quiet. But it also erased them from history. Only fragments remain: letters, diaries, and rare memoirs written after service ended. One of the most revealing came from a housemaid named Hannah Culwick. She worked in London in the mid-1800s and kept secret diaries of her experiences. She wrote about the daily grind, the exhaustion, the fear of being seen as nothing more than property. But she also described power, the quiet pride in her work, the control that came from knowing her employer's private worlds. "We see what they cannot hide," she wrote, "and they never see us at all." Hannah's words reveal something larger than class. They show the hidden balance of Victorian life. Respectability built on dependence, luxury on labor, silence on survival. By the 1880s, service was both a job and a prison. It provided shelter and food but demanded obedience and invisibility. Young girls entered service at 13 or 14. Some stayed for life. Others escaped through marriage or misfortune. The lucky ones found employers who treated them with decency. The unlucky found cruelty dressed as civility. Every servant learned early that loyalty was their only defense. To question, to reveal, to know too much was dangerous. They became experts in discretion. But in their silence, they carried the record of a century, the unseen history behind the portraits and the lace curtains. Now the lamps upstairs glow softly. The family prepares for dinner. You, the maid, wait behind the door, ready to enter when the bell rings. You carry the tray, the silver shining under candlelight. The guests laugh, unaware that you know more about them than they know about themselves. You are a shadow among light, essential and forgotten, trusted and invisible. You will hear what they whisper when they think no one listens. You will remember it, though you will never tell. And you wonder, as the laughter fades and the night begins, whether your silence protects them or condemns them. You wake again before dawn. The fire has gone cold. Your hands ache from polishing brass the night before. You rise quietly, careful not to wake the others. The servants' hall is dim. You light the lamp, set the kettle, and begin again. The day starts here in the shadows. The family above sleeps under heavy blankets, unaware of the rhythm below. You know their habits better than they do. The master snores until 7:30. The mistress stirs at 8. Her first word always the same: tea. The children shout for breakfast. The house comes alive, and so must you. There is a strange intimacy in service. You handle their clothes, their letters, their food. You know their smells, their tempers, their fears. You see them sick, drunk, or alone. You hear their laughter and their lies. They depend on you completely, yet never admit it. You are invisible, but you are everywhere. The lady's maid holds more power than any other servant. She manages the mistress's wardrobe, cosmetics, and even emotions. She listens when her mistress confides secrets, nods politely when she speaks of her husband's absences, and says nothing when she notices lipstick on the wrong collar. Her silence is not loyalty, it is survival. In one London household, a maid named Sarah Hopkins wrote later in life about her mistress, Lady Harrowby. "She trusted me with her jewels and her shame," Sarah wrote. "I dressed her for the opera while she cried. I unbuttoned her gown when she returned smelling of another man's perfume." Sarah never told a soul. To speak was to lose everything. The butler knew just as much. He controlled access to the master's study, poured his drinks, delivered his letters, and kept the keys to the wine cellar, and sometimes to other rooms. Butlers understood more than etiquette. They understood discretion as currency. A loyal butler could save a man's reputation. A careless one could ruin it. It was common knowledge among servants that their employers were not saints. Adultery was frequent. Gambling was hidden as late meetings. The city's best tailors and worst secrets often shared the same address. Yet in public, the families appeared pure. Respectability was maintained by the staff's silence. This silence became its own form of power. Some servants learned to use what they knew. A few blackmailed employers quietly, never large sums, just enough to ensure comfort or protection. Others used their influence subtly. A word, a glance, a reminder of what they had seen could earn lifelong job security. No one dared to dismiss someone who knew too much. Most, though, kept their heads down. The unspoken rule was simple. To remain unseen was to remain safe. Service was a contract between truth and silence. You cleaned their dirt, literal and moral, and in return they pretended you were not there. This moral invisibility defined Victorian Britain. Society could praise virtue while living on hypocrisy because the servants carried the burden of evidence. They washed away the proof. They made sin invisible. Without them, the facade of moral order would have collapsed. Even the architecture of the house enforced this silence. Separate staircases, hidden corridors, and narrow servants' doors ensured the classes never met by accident. Bells connected every room to the kitchen and hall. Each had a specific tone. The family rang. The servants appeared. Voices were unnecessary. Contact was controlled by sound and service. At dinner, the family discussed literature, politics, and propriety while the servants moved silently around them. Their presence was felt but ignored. A good servant left no trace except cleanliness. When guests praised the household's order, the master smiled as if it were his own achievement. But behind the closed doors of the servants' quarters, life was louder. The hall filled with gossip and laughter once the family slept. There were jokes, songs, even flirtations. It was the only place where the staff could breathe freely. The hierarchy below stairs mirrored the one above, but it was softened by familiarity. Still, the distance between classes never disappeared. Servants rarely used first names for each other in front of superiors. A housemaid would call the butler Mr., even if they had worked together for 20 years. Respect was mandatory, equality impossible. The cruelty of this system was not only physical but psychological. Servants were expected to erase their individuality. They could not show anger, affection, or fatigue. To feel was to risk dismissal. The perfect servant was a ghost with hands. Letters from former maids described the toll this took. One wrote, "After years in service, I could not speak freely even when alone. I still curtsied when I entered an empty room. The habits of deference became reflex long after leaving service." In rare cases, intimacy crossed the line of propriety. A master might take advantage of a maid, or a mistress might confide too deeply in her servant. These situations were dangerous for both. A whisper of impropriety could destroy reputations. Many maids who became pregnant were dismissed without reference. Some ended up in workhouses. Others vanished into the anonymity of London's poorer districts. The city was full of their silence. The servant class existed in two worlds, essential yet expendable, trusted yet feared. Their labor built the empire's domestic order, but their existence was treated as moral background noise. Society pretended that order was natural, that the hierarchy was divine. It was not. It was maintained by exhaustion and quiet endurance. By the 1880s, this world began to shift. Industrialization opened new jobs for women in factories and offices. Wages in domestic service stagnated. Young women started refusing positions in private homes. Newspapers reported a servant shortage. Employers complained that girls these days lacked discipline. The truth was simpler. They wanted freedom. Service tied a person's life entirely to another's. It offered stability but not dignity. The new century promised something different. A small wage in a shop or factory meant independence, however harsh the work. For many, that was worth more than the illusion of safety. As servants left, the silence upstairs grew heavier. Families struggled to maintain appearances. Mistresses who once commanded 3 maids now managed 1. Dinner parties shrank. Respectability became harder to afford. The decline of servants was the beginning of honesty in British households. Without them, the illusion of perfection faltered. You stand again in the great house, the gaslight dimming. The family has retired. You finish the dishes, dry your hands, and step into the servants' corridor. The walls are thin. You can hear laughter upstairs. A man's voice, not the master's. You turn away, pretending not to notice. You have learned that to know everything is to say nothing. Tonight, like every night, you carry the truth in silence. You keep their world polished while yours remains unseen. The house sleeps soundly because you do not speak. But sometimes, when you lie in your narrow bed, you wonder what would happen if the walls could talk. If every secret you've kept rose through the floorboards like smoke. Would the world above survive the truth it rests upon? The art of the boudoir, private portraits, and painted desire. You walk through the narrow streets of Paris in 1867, the year of the Great Exposition. The air smells of oil paint, perfume, and rain. In the windows of small studios near Montmartre, portraits of women gaze back at you. Some clothed, some not, all captured in a softness that seems to breathe. These are not paintings for galleries. They are private commissions, destined for bedrooms and locked drawers. The boudoir portrait is the art of secrecy. It exists between intimacy and respectability, between beauty and confession. To paint such a portrait is to walk a careful line. To pose for one is to risk everything. In Victorian society, public virtue ruled, but private desire never disappeared. Men and women found quiet ways to express what the world forbade. The boudoir became that private world. Behind its doors, women transformed from symbols of purity into subjects of fascination. They were no longer daughters or wives, but individuals with bodies, choices, and secrets. The tradition began in France, where art had long tolerated sensuality more easily than English prudery. Parisian artists like Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres and Edouard Manet redefined how the female form could be seen, not as temptation, but as subject. England followed slowly, carefully disguising eroticism as aesthetics. A study of beauty could be shown in polite circles. A portrait for private display could not. You step inside one of these hidden studios. The floor smells faintly of turpentine and dust. The walls are covered in fabrics, velvet, silk, lace. A chaise longue sits beneath a high window, the light diffused by gauze curtains. Here, the artist arranges not just color but illusion. The model stands at ease. She may be an actress, a courtesan, or a bored wife of the upper class. The artist addresses her as Madame, even if her real name is forgotten. She wears a gown that slips easily from her shoulders. The pose will be modest enough to escape censure, yet intimate enough to quicken a viewer's pulse. The brush moves slowly. Every stroke must balance decency with suggestion. Portrait too bold risks scandal. Too reserved, and it loses its purpose. The artist knows this dance well. So do his clients. The boudoir portrait was not about nudity alone. It was about ownership of self, of image, of story. A woman could commission her own likeness, unseen by public eyes. In a time when women had little power over their representation, this private art gave them a rare form of control. Letters from artists and sitters reveal the strange intimacy of these encounters. One French painter wrote, "She looked at me as if I were confessing instead of painting." Another sitter described the experience as being seen truthfully for the first time. In England, where public morality demanded restraint, such portraits often traveled under disguise. They were labeled as Venus's nymphs or allegories of spring. The subjects' faces were blurred or omitted entirely, allowing plausible deniability. Yet anyone who looked closely knew better. The art of euphemism became its own language. Photography soon entered this world, changing everything. By the 1870s, cameras offered a faster, cheaper way to create private images. Boudoir photography exploded in popularity, especially in Paris and London. Studios advertised artistic studies for select clientele. The models posed with parasols, fans, or draped fabrics, never fully nude, always almost. The softness of the image made it respectable enough to pass as art. A photographer named Félix Jacques Moulin became infamous for his academic work. His images were seized by the police for indecency, though they were no more explicit than a Greek statue. His defense was simple: I photograph form, not sin. He lost the case but won the future. His work became the blueprint for a century of hidden beauty. The clients for these portraits were not always men. Wealthy women, too, commissioned such images. Some sent them as gifts to husbands posted abroad. Others kept them for themselves. To own one's portrait was to declare ownership of one's own body in a culture that denied it. For women confined by corsets and codes, the boudoir was the only place where the body could be honest. Even queens were not untouched by the trend. Rumors surrounded private portraits of Empress Eugenie of France and later, of mistresses in royal circles across Europe. None were confirmed, but the gossip itself revealed something important. Society feared women who controlled their image. In Victorian London, this kind of art existed in half-light. Dealers sold reproductions discreetly. Private collectors displayed them in rooms where only certain guests were invited. The polite world pretended ignorance. The same politicians who voted for moral laws visited galleries where mythological studies were sold in gilt frames. Painters, too, understood the hypocrisy. They joked privately that every Venus had a patron's wife's shoulders, every nymph his mistress's smile. The art world thrived on denial, feeding respectability with disguised desire. But beneath the hypocrisy, something new was happening. The boudoir portrait redefined what it meant to be seen. In public, women were observed but not recognized, decorated but voiceless. In private, these portraits gave them visibility, even agency. They could choose how to appear, even if the world never saw the image. Some of these women left letters about the experience. One wrote to her painter, "For once, I was not the wife or the mother. I was simply myself." Another said, "When I looked at the finished portrait, I felt I had met the woman I had hidden all my life." These confessions tell a quiet truth. The boudoir portrait was not rebellion in the loud sense. It was self-definition in a world that feared female truth. Each canvas or photograph whispered the same message: I exist beyond your rules. Still, the danger remained. Discovery could destroy a reputation. Servants who stumbled upon hidden portraits could lose their positions, or their silence could be bought. Scandals occasionally surfaced when stolen art found its way into the wrong hands. Newspapers used moral outrage to sell papers, while the same readers who clutched their pearls secretly admired the images. You stand in the studio as the painting nears completion. The woman's face glows softly in the light. The artist adds the final stroke, a line at her collarbone, the hint of breath beneath lace. The portrait is neither indecent nor pure. It is human. The woman rises, ties her gown, and looks at her reflection. For a moment, she seems freer than any lady at court. She thanks the artist, pays in cash, and leaves by the side door. Her portrait will hang behind curtains in her dressing room, seen only by her and, perhaps, one other. Outside, the street noise returns. The rattle of carriages, the calls of vendors, the city pretending to be moral. But somewhere, behind lace curtains and locked drawers, beauty breathes honestly, unashamed. And you wonder as you walk away, was the boudoir portrait an act of vanity, or the quiet beginning of liberation? You return to the studio a year later. The same smell of turpentine fills the air. The same velvet drapes soften the light. But something has changed. The clientele is larger, the clientele quieter. Paris has discovered the business of beauty. What was once private pleasure has become an industry built on discretion. Artists now advertise tasteful studies. Photographers hang signs that say, "For artists only." Everyone understands what these phrases mean, yet no one says the word. Respectability depends on pretending not to know. The women who pose have changed too. They are no longer only courtesans or bored wives. Some are working-class women earning what the world denies them elsewhere. Others are artists themselves, using the camera or the brush to reclaim their own image. The boudoir is still private, but the power inside it has begun to shift. You meet one such woman, a seamstress named Elise. She is 26, with careful posture and a quiet voice. She poses not for vanity but survival. Her husband left for America 2 years ago and stopped sending money. The factory pays little. A sitting at a photography studio earns her more in an hour than a week at the machine. She knows the risk. If her image is recognized, she will lose everything. So she uses a false name, wears a mask for some sessions, and requests that her face remain partly hidden. The photographer agrees. He understands the rules. In this business, protection is part of the price. The session begins. The studio is warm, the light filtered through gauze. Elise sits on a chair, her dress draped just low enough to reveal the curve of her shoulder. Her eyes look downward, not in shame but in control. She knows exactly what she is selling. Not flesh, but mystery. The camera clicks. The sound is sharp, final, like a secret sealed in glass. A week later, her photograph is ready. It is beautiful, soft focus, delicate, almost sacred. She stares at it for a long time before tucking it into her purse. "For my husband," she says quietly, "or for myself if he never returns." No one ever learns which it was. Elise's story is one of thousands. Each portrait, each photograph is a small rebellion against invisibility. Women who could not speak in public found a private language in these images. They could not own property or vote, but they could own their likeness. That ownership, in a century built on control, was a quiet revolution. Not every story ends kindly. In London, a scandal erupts in 1879 when a maid discovers a drawer of photographs in her employer's study. His wife, half-dressed, painted as Diana of the Hunt. The maid sells the prints to a tabloid for a few shillings. The papers print them as an aristocratic indecency. The woman's name is withheld, but everyone in her circle knows. She retreats from society, her portrait burned, her painter ruined. The maid disappears into anonymity again. The city forgets her name but remembers her act. The incident spreads fear among artists and patrons alike. Studios tighten their rules. Locks are added to drawers. Many photographers destroy negatives after a single print. Privacy becomes the new luxury, yet the demand never slows. For every scandal, there are 100 new clients. Politicians, heiresses, opera singers, widows. They all come quietly, stepping through side doors, wrapped in veils. The world condemns them publicly and imitates them privately. In this double life, women learn to use secrecy as armor. A portrait may be hidden, but it is still proof of existence. For women trapped in arranged marriages or constrained by propriety, the image becomes a mirror of freedom. It whispers, "This is me," even if the world pretends not to see. Some of these portraits survive today, stored in archives or private collections. Historians study them as art, but the truth within them runs deeper. Look closely at their eyes. They do not belong to submissive muses. They belong to women who dared to be visible, if only in secret. The artists themselves lived on the edge of respectability. Many walked a fine line between creator and accomplice. Some saw their work as liberation. Others saw profit. The best among them, like Nader in Paris or Reglander in London, insisted that their photographs were studies of light and form. They argued that morality was a matter of intention. Critics disagreed, calling their art civilized sin. The truth was simpler. The boudoir portrait was a transaction. Power flowed in both directions. Money from the client, control from the sitter, reputation risked by both. Each image was a collaboration between visibility and trust. By the 1880s, the style spreads to Vienna, Berlin, and New York. Each city adds its own tone. In Vienna, the portraits grow dreamlike, influenced by the symbolists. In Berlin, they are colder, almost medical. In New York, they are disguised as society photography. A wealthy woman might claim she posed for a new fashion plate. Everyone understands the lie but respects the effort. You stand again in the Paris studio. The photographer now employs assistants. The walls are lined with hundreds of portraits, all hidden behind curtains. He calls it his private gallery. Few have ever seen it. He says quietly, "Every woman who comes here brings her truth. My job is to keep it safe." He points to a framed photograph, half covered in dust. The woman in the picture wears pearls and looks directly at the camera. "She was the wife of a politician," he says. "She told me once, 'He speaks for the nation, but I cannot even speak for myself.' So I let the photograph speak. She died a year later. The image remains. Outside, the boudoir becomes metaphor. Painters begin to show women not as muses but thinkers, readers, artists. The private room turns from a place of indulgence to a place of identity. It becomes the setting for introspection rather than seduction. Writers notice. In novels by George Sand, Henry James, and Colette, the boudoir shifts meaning. It becomes the symbol of interior life. A woman's room, once imagined as a place of secrecy, becomes a stage for intellect and desire combined. The world begins to listen, reluctantly. Still, for every woman who gained voice through portraiture, there were dozens who paid the price of being seen too clearly. Respectability forgave men for indulgence but condemned women for being remembered. Society demanded that beauty remain mysterious but punished those who tried to define it. You leave the studio as dusk falls. The lamps flicker on, reflecting in puddles. Behind closed shutters, women look at their own faces on canvas and paper. Some feel pride, some feel fear, all feel something close to ownership. The city hums with judgment above and confession below. The boudoir remains the narrow bridge between them, a quiet room where truth hides under silk. And as you walk through the evening crowd, you wonder, how many portraits were never destroyed? How many secrets, sealed behind paint and glass, still wait in attics and archives, whispering the story of a century that pretended not to desire what it could not control? The year is 1909. The boudoir studio still exists, though quieter now. The golden age of secret portraiture is ending. The world has discovered a new invention, cinema, and the moving image is beginning to swallow what paintings and photographs once whispered. Desire, once confined to velvet rooms, now flickers on screens. The private has begun to turn public. You walk again through Montmartre. The artists still paint, but fewer curtains cover their windows. The taboo that once protected the boudoir portrait now seems quaint. The same society that once punished women for being seen now sells their likenesses on postcards. The forbidden has become fashionable. In the shop windows you see it clearly. Postcards of Parisian beauties, modern muses, and les elegantes. Their faces are uncovered, their smiles unashamed. The poses echo the old boudoir portraits, but the secrecy is gone. What was once private rebellion is now public entertainment. For the women who once risked everything to be seen, this change feels both triumph and theft. The art they made of themselves now belongs to the market. The image has lost its danger and its dignity. You visit the studio one last time. The photographer is older now. His hands tremble slightly as he sorts through old glass plates. Many are broken, others are fading. He has begun burning some, afraid of what might happen if they fall into careless hands. There was truth in these, he says quietly, but truth ages faster than lies. He shows you a final image, a portrait of a woman reading in a chair, her robe loose at the shoulder, her face turned toward the light. She asked to be painted as she was in the morning, he says. No pose, no performance, just herself. He smiles faintly. That one felt honest. The rest were performances. That distinction between honesty and performance defines the end of the boudoir age. What began as private expression ends as aesthetic convention. By the 1910s, the boudoir portrait becomes another style, reproduced endlessly in advertising, film, and fashion. The rebellion dissolves into routine, yet something remains beneath the surface. The women who once sat in those rooms left an invisible inheritance. They taught the world that beauty could be self-chosen, that intimacy could be art, that being seen need not mean being owned. Their portraits, though hidden or lost, planted the seed of self-representation that future generations would claim openly. When the Great War arrives, the studios close. The men go to the front, the women to factories and hospitals. Silk turns to uniform, lace to practicality. The boudoir, once a chamber of softness, becomes a memory of peace. But even war cannot erase the idea. Soldiers carry photographs of wives, lovers, and actresses. The private portrait now becomes a token of endurance. What was once indulgent becomes sacred, a reminder of life worth returning to. In this transformation, the image regains its intimacy. The same kind of photograph once condemned as immoral now comforts the dying. Desire becomes memory, and memory becomes meaning. After the war, in the 1920s, modernity arrives with arrogance. The flapper replaces the muse. Women cut their hair, shorten their skirts, and pose openly for magazines. The boudoir no longer hides. It moves into fashion spreads. Studios advertise modern glamour sittings. The light is brighter, the shadows fewer. The intimacy remains, but the silence is gone. The old photographers and painters fade into obscurity. Their craft, once scandalous, becomes history. But the women they captured, those anonymous faces from 1860s Paris or 1880s London, begin to reappear in museums labeled as curiosities. The captions say, "Unknown woman, circa 1870." But you can sense her presence through the paper and the brushwork. She is no longer anonymous to you. You stand in a gallery decades later, looking at one of these portraits. The woman's expression is calm, almost amused. You imagine her standing in that studio long ago, hearing the sound of a shutter, knowing she was defying a rule without speaking a word. You wonder what she would think if she saw her image here, framed and admired by strangers. Would she feel vindicated or betrayed? Perhaps both. For her, the portrait was not about fame. It was about the right to exist privately and fully. For those who came after her, it became a statement about freedom itself. The art historians who study these works argue endlessly about intention. Was it sensuality, rebellion, commerce, or confession? They miss the simplest truth. It was survival. To be painted, to be photographed, was to leave evidence that you were more than a name in someone else's story. By mid-century, new artists rediscover this honesty. Photographers like Imogen Cunningham and painters like Tamara de Lempicka take the boudoir out of secrecy and into art. Their women look back at the viewer without apology. The line between subject and audience dissolves. The gaze that once belonged only to men becomes mutual. And yet, the boudoir never truly disappears. It changes shape. The velvet chaise becomes a film set. The oil lamp becomes a camera light. The private portrait becomes the selfie. The desire to control one's image survives every invention. You think of those first women, the actresses, seamstresses, and socialites, who risked everything to sit in those rooms. They would recognize today's world, though it moves faster. They would understand the bargain. Visibility always costs something. As you leave the gallery, you see their legacy everywhere. In advertisements, in portraits, in every photograph where someone decides how they wish to be seen. The boudoir's lesson endures. The most radical act in any age is to show the self without shame. The truth is simple. Shame was never moral. It was management, kept beauty under control. And when the women of the 19th century stepped into that soft light, they began to dismantle it one portrait at a time. You pause at the door, looking back once more at the painting on the wall. The woman's eyes seem to follow you. Not pleading, not proud, only present. For the first time in history, she is allowed to stay visible. And as you step into the modern street, with its bright windows and louder freedoms, one quiet thought lingers. Perhaps the boudoir was never a room at all. Perhaps it was the first mirror in which women saw themselves and decided they deserved to be seen.